Well, the end of an era on the horizon in Afghanistan. U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta has announced that America's longest war is coming to an end. By next year, the U.S. and NATO aims to draw down troops and end combat in Afghanistan. With the official end of the war, we want to take a look back at what this all means and what has actually been accomplished. With thousands dead, billions of dollars spent, was a decade of bloodshed and war all for nothing? I pose this question to Derrick Crowe, political director for Brave New Foundation. Take a listen.
The investment of lives and resources in a military-first strategy was absolutely a waste. We said prior to President Obama's latest escalations in Afghanistan that, more troops were not going to solve the problem, that if you added more troops, you would end up increasing the temperature of the conflict and more civilians would be caught in the crossfire, and that's exactly what happened. So the answer is yes. I mean, that military-first strategy has been a waste, and if you heard about the recent NATO report that was leaked that showed the Taliban's self-concept is still very strong, you'll see that that military-first policy has failed to achieve victory, and it was always going to fail to achieve victory. The right moves would have been political solutions that would have brought all the stakeholders in Afghanistan to the table and elected a government through a legitimate means that would have represented the will of the people there.
Now, with this impending drawdown of troops and as the U.S. reflects on the time spent in Afghanistan, what was really accomplished there?
I think that leaked NATO report really shows that we're going to have a very hard time pointing to any lasting impact on the Afghanistan political process, especially if we keep supporting corrupt national and corrupt local leaders like Hamid Karzai, his family members, people like Colonel Razik, people that we know to be corrupt, know to be war criminals, but we arm them anyway simply because they were enemies of the Taliban. Now, if we want to have a lasting impact in Afghanistan, we can support things like election reform, like supporting people who are advocating for the rights of women in Afghanistan, but doing that with guns is absolutely not the right policy in Afghanistan.
Well, what has been done to curb Taliban influence in the region, or has their influence in the region waned at all?
Well, I think part of the problem in our attempts to get them to the negotiation table is that the United States has been successful at killing, senior leaders of Taliban membership, but those are just replaced from the bottom. And the negative impact that actually has had is it has brought to power more radical, younger leaders in the Taliban that actually are less willing to negotiate an end to the war. I mean, let's be honest, based on what we've seen, military force is not going to force an end to the conflict with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Our only options were always political discussions, and our military-first policy has radicalized that faction even more and brought to power people who are less willing to negotiate and are more repressive on the rights of women. So I think it's a fair assessment to say that the more we've relied on military solutions in Afghanistan, the worse the situation has got and the further we are from lasting gains in that region.
And as you just mentioned, this highly classified report that was leaked shows that the Taliban, backed by Pakistan, will rise back to power. The U.S. has been trying to form some kind of an alliance with Pakistan in hopes that they can help in fighting terrorism. But in light of this report, is any kind of constructive relationship with Pakistan now unlikely?
Well, I think it's not quite fair to say that the Taliban would return to power in the same way that they were in power before the U.S. invasion. It's not going to be that cut and dry. It will be a very ambiguous relationship as to who is in power and who's in control. The thing that's fair to say is that it's not going to be possible through military force to eliminate the Taliban as a political force in the life of Afghanistan. And the longer we put off entering into real good faith negotiations with our opponents in this conflict, the longer we're going to make sure that that conflict is settled by force of arms. Now, what we've said in other pieces that we've put out has been that the people in the regions where the insurgency is the strongest, what they've said they want is a just election process that doesn't blacklist people based on which side of the conflict that they're on, but which blacklists them or lets them on the ballot based on their record of human rights and respect for the people of Afghanistan. Right now, those standards are very unjust. If you're an ally of the United States or of Kabul, you can get away with much, much more without being blacklisted, and that just helps promote petty thugs and local warlords as leaders in Afghanistan. What those people want is a fair process that keeps the worst people out from both sides of the conflict and then allows a new election process with fair rules that allows people from all sides of the conflict to put their name on the ballot.
Now, we heard this news from the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, that this drawdown is going to happen by the end of next year. Is there a graceful way for the U.S. to exit the country?
Well, let's be clear about what's on the table. Nobody in the in the Obama administration has said that there's going to be a date certain for all troops to be out of Afghanistan. What they have said is they're kind of speeding up the process, and by 2013 they'll be handing off combat operations to the Afghans locally. Now, if that follows the path that it followed in Iraq, what will start is a withdrawal of U.S. forces kind of out of the faces of the local people in their villages and onto more base structures where they're on large bases instead of out in the communities all the time, and from there would then further withdraw out of the country. Now, as far as what it's going to be like on the way out, let's not paint too rosy of a picture here. It will be more unstable, but the simple fact is that adding more troops in Afghanistan did not bring down the level of violence. In fact, it helped it escalate. And staying there for another 10 years and wasting $2 billion a week is not in the interest of the American people when there's no victory in sight or even on the table as a definition. So the way out is to simply begin pulling the troops out, to support more fair election processes in Afghanistan, and to, if we're trying to avoid another Vietnam, let's avoid fighting wars using the exact same strategies that got us into the mess in Vietnam in the first place.
Now, this news is coming after troops have been pulled out of Iraq. So now both of these wars are kind of coming to a close gradually. How would you compare the two and the legacy that the U.S. has left behind in these countries?
I would say that both wars utilized exactly the same kind of overarching military strategy that we saw in Vietnam, and because of that, both wars have not only damaged our reputation in the world in general, but specifically in the region. And that what we should learn from this experience is that sending hundreds of thousands of troops into other people's countries to try to remake societies, motivated through national hubris, is absolutely either not a way to make Americans safer, nor a wise use of our resources abroad. And what we can learn from these two conflicts is that, the most important thing that Americans can do is regard the arguments made for war and more troops from leaders with skepticism, and work really hard, as folks have worked here in the United States, to end those wars as soon as possible.
Derrick, thanks for weighing in and giving us your perspective. That was Political Director for Brave New Foundation, Derrick Crowe.